Hey everybody, Jared Jones. Amazon just had their biggest layoff in company history. One of the largest home flippers in the nation, losing millions, gets out of the game, lays off nearly 1,000 people. All of this on the back of last week where you had many companies lay off people. There's a lot of strange messaging going on throughout the YouTube ecosystem, I think is actually causing people to be disillusioned. People are thinking that the interest rate's possibly going to start coming down. Both the Fed rate, mortgage rate's possibly going to be dropping. Maybe Jerome Powell's going to get dovish and he's going to back off on interest rates. Maybe inflation's finally under control. I'm going to tell you that we are just in the beginning, folks, which means that the Fed rate's got more to go. We got more pain from mortgages, more layoffs coming, that you got to understand this is a longer range battle. I'm going to help you understand essentially what all these billionaires that just laid everybody off understand. I'm going to get started here in a moment, but smash that like button if you would. It'd help me a ton. And at the end of the video, if it sucks, you can always take it back. Real quick, let's start off with the most recent announced layoffs. Twitter, 50%. Intel, 20%, Snapchat laid off 20%, Coinbase laid off 18%, Meta laid off 13%, Redfin 13%, Credit Suisse, Goldman Sachs, Microsoft, Amazon was listed as having a hiring freeze. They've now moved to full-blown layoffs, and Apple. The news was basically kind of leaking out some of these companies were going to start laying off. You got to understand, if there's actually layoffs happening at the top level, the largest businesses in the country, you know this is affecting the small business. There's been recent announcements that small business defaults are on the rise, meaning they're not able to pay their bills, and it is a single-digit amount, but it's starting to set a trend that the pain is being felt on Main Street, and you kind of encapsulate all of that. And obviously I'm not here to talk about, you know, the general stock market or the general consumers planning on their own aside from real estate. I mean, real estate's where I'm about. And if you didn't get a headline that just recently happened among two of the largest professional real estate owners, which is Redfin and Opendoor, both of them have just announced, number one, Redfin says, I'm getting out of the business of flipping houses. Now, Redfin is what we call an iBuyer, and iBuyer is this coin term of corporate technology-based companies that buy lots of houses and really flip them for a profit. So, you know, you had Redfin come out and say this month they're out. They are mounting losses. They can't do it profitably, and so they're getting out of the game. You had Zillow a year ago. They were the first iBuyer major player to exit the business and say, hey, things are getting too dark for us. The interesting thing about Redfin, that if you're not really tracking Redfin, that most of us in the professional side, real estate professional side, know, is Redfin knows real estate. They employ a lot of economists. They like to write about real estate. They like to draft data on it. They like to make predictions on it. And when Redfin is saying that, hey, we don't like what we see in 2023 and we're out, that is not good. Okay. Opendoor, another infamous home flipper, has just laid off almost 600 people, I believe was the announcement, which is interesting because they are the last, they're really the largest. And until I think people stop sending them funds to lose, the Opendoor is only going to be around as long as they can continue to raise capital, because I do not see how they're making it. You'll remember with Opendoor, they just lost a Department of Justice I don't know if it was a lawsuit, but they were sanctioned of some kind. They lost almost $100 million they had to pay out because there's some kind of like a predatory explanation on how they're doing business. They didn't like their ads, and so they clamped down on them. And that was maybe like 4 months ago. What's interesting is I'm seeing in my local market some of the properties they've picked up lately, and I'm like, wow, like Opendoor is getting serious. Like, if some of the properties that I've seen recently are accurate, like what they paid for it, man, they're hitting sellers hard now. You call Opendoor, they just might lowball you for a change, which is crazy because a lot of the stories last year was that they were paying more for properties than typical buyers were. Like, they were the highest paying, they were overpaying essentially for houses that they were supposedly going to flip. You know, when you think about what flipping is, you need to buy low, and then you need to resell it to the marketplace at a price higher than what you paid to do it profitably to pay everybody involved. Now, if they're saying that they can't do that comfortably, profitably, then that means that they don't feel that there's a bottom to be found anytime soon in the housing market. Just there's no other way to cut it, okay? Because they laid off nearly 1,000 people, and you size that piece up with the fact that last week Jerome Powell came out and said, hey, look, the marketplace for employment is too tight, okay? And we are still not anywhere, don't even consider the fact that we're gonna pause interest rates, okay? Meaning, his main tool, if you will, to inject a benzo, something to kind of slow the market down, is raising interest rates. So Jerome Powell makes the announcement that he's got to raise rates, and he does. And then beyond that, you have this situation where by Friday, you had this inflation data come out saying that, oh, you know what, it's softened a bit, okay? So then you have people thinking, oh, you know what, there's hope. Maybe he's not going to raise rates anymore, or he's going to get more dovish about it because of that most recent update. The second part that I'm also seeing people putting content out about that have followers, decent sized followers on YouTube, saying things like, you know what, interest rates buckled in housing. Mortgage rates are going to crash now because you saw mortgage rates react. They had a market reaction to the data of inflation numbers coming down a little bit, okay? So let's speak to all that, because if Jerome Powell is now all of a sudden going to reverse himself, and all this content, if you're following someone on YouTube, and there's some guys with big followings that are sitting there now saying that the dovishness is on the way, and that Jerome Powell is going to reverse course and start lowering rates where he's been raising them. And nothing to fear, folks. If you're listening to pivot nonsense, you got to understand what's going on at a whole. Listen to this, and this is why Amazon and Facebook laid off, okay? They didn't take advantage of a headline and then say, okay, we're gonna lay people off now because we can cut some payroll. No. Listen, this is what's going on. When Jerome Powell started to adjust interest rates from the bottom, okay, he started raising them very rapidly, historically quick, to where they are now at around 4% on the Fed rate. What he did is he injected, like I said a second ago, a benzo, a slowdown onto the marketplace. Okay, so that puts a pressure on how much money costs, how much operations cost, and essentially what that does is that will slow things down, okay? It basically rewards savers, okay, because interest rates are higher, savings are higher in terms of their payback, where people, were getting no reward for the last couple of years. They were getting rewarded to borrow, and they were getting punished to save, right? That's what's been happening. He's now reversing that, where he's raising the rates and putting a damper, a benzo, if you will, on the economy. So he's now punishing the spender, rewarding the saver. And as a result, you have the economy slowing. You have all the headlines saying that demand, okay, so all Jerome has affected so far, Jerome, like I know the guy, all he's done is actually affect the marketplace from the standpoint of raising rates to slow down how much people are willing to spend. And that's already started, okay? So the inflation response you have right now is purely because he lowered consumer activity. Okay, so he raised the rate a little bit, lowered consumer activity. The second part, and what he said last Wednesday, that most people do not understand, is, hey, the employment's too tight. Now, what he's saying now is we've got demand slowing down, so the amount of people buying is coming down a bit. But now we've got to actually lower the cost of what things cost. Now, you got to understand, if a person makes $16 an hour at McDonald's, okay, you can't take the price of the Big Mac down from $6 an hour, because you still have to pay the guy that's cooking fries, his $15, $16, and $17 an hour. If you get those employment costs down, then everyone buying food can now get food at a lower price. Okay, so understand inflation has to come down in tandem. Now, nobody wants to stand up and tell the public this. No, it's not popular for the politicians to actually come out and articulate what's going on, which is simply like, hey, do you want things to cost less? Do you want to be able to afford certain things? Well, we got to get the actual cost of these commodities down, but with it, there has to be less competition for workers, okay? So understand what's happening next. Jerome Powell is now going to change. He's going to keep raising interest rates, which will then create tightness, okay? Continued tightness on how much people buy, continue to reward savers, but then put the damper on how many people are employed at the same time in certain markets, okay? So now you're gonna have widespread layoffs, which is now a fact. And then kind of with that, you're gonna see situations where those same industries that are losing people go from a situation where everyone's, the employers are fighting to get someone hired, to now the employees or the job seekers are now fighting to become employed. Okay, see that paradigm shift. The marketplace has been job hoppers going from one place to the next place because one guy will pay them $20 an hour and the next guy will pay them $25. So there's been all this reporting about cycling around the economy. Well, if you now lose, when you start laying people off in waves, you're going to have a lot more people in the job seeker mode and fewer employers looking to hire them. At that point, the employers needing help can actually get more competitive in what they're paying. You might see purge layoffs just to get people down in wage. You've seen this happen in companies over time where, we've been paying everyone at this wage. Well, now I can get the marketplace to pay a little less. Also, the cost of the commodities that these people have to buy, they're also, should fall in tandem. And ultimately, that's what the game is. Now, for all of you that think, pivot's coming, pivot this and pivot, I'm telling you, Jerome Powell knows he has to blow up employment. He knows it. And we are nowhere near. He's dead to rights. If his goal is to blow up employment, create a bunch of slack in the job market, get the numbers down so that the supply side, what manufacturers have in cost of goods from a cost delivery standpoint, if all that stuff is going to be deflated, then he's dead to rights. You have to bring the temperature down in the cycle of employment, interest rates, and again, what, everybody, you pissed about this expansion market, then this contraction market, you hate it? Welcome to the central bank. For everybody to say we're in a capitalistic system or we're in a free market, this isn't a free market. This is a manipulated market based on central banking, okay? 100% is. It 100% is. And for all of you that think, hey, you know what, they're going to pause everything and they're going to just stop adjusting rates and he might even start lowering them again. They can't. You will take and you will decimate the poor and the middle class. Period. Inflation can only go so far without the employment and the rate of unemployment. If it doesn't climb, employment can't go down. Okay, cheeseburgers can't get cheaper if the guy flipping them makes $16 an hour. Kind of made that point a second ago, but a point of clarity is, unless we want to stay at 7.7% or whatever it's at right now, unemployment has to get higher. Okay, so that's why this whole game, we're like in phase one, battle number one of a series of battles that are going to get bloodier and, it just is. Pain's coming. So I digress. Let's get back to the interest rate conversation. So last week, the interest rates dropped 0.25% because there was great news about this inflation dropping a little bit. So then you have a lot of people now kind of coming up and saying things like mortgage rates are crashing and there's all these videos surfacing. That is the most ridiculous thing because if you look at mortgages on a graph, the rate is just kind of constantly climbing. There's always market announcements that do create little regressive parts where the rate does kind of bounce back a little bit. I'll give you some examples of that. From April to June, we were approaching a 6% interest rate. At some point, we crossed over that. And then between August and September, it dipped to like 4.99 for, it was only under 5% for like a day. You'll see it in the graph. But I mean, it was a moment in time. It was in the 5% range again in the early fall, late summer month, you know, for a few weeks, and then it just jumped right back up, went over 7%. But if you look, you know, if you step back and look at the entire chart, you can see the direction, okay? It's just like this, like last Friday, you know, in the, you know, 3 months from now, 4 months from now, you're going to step back and look at a 30-year chart and you're going to see last Friday as being just a blip on an incline, you know, because there's, you know, main driver for interest rate right now is Fed activity, and particularly their mortgage-backed security sell-off, which is being publicly put out there. So it's not like it's a big secret. And they have a lot to sell off. They were buying for 8 years or so. They've accumulated a bunch. Their buying artificially held the interest rate down, which drove home prices up, okay? So for all of you folks that think that, number one, the Fed tightening is over, baloney. It's not over on any front. It's not over on the Fed rate. It's not over on the mortgage rate. And so if you aren't paying attention to that, and you need to plan accordingly. You need to do whatever you need to do to structure yourself, belt tightening, if you will, because it's not changing. It is not changing. Unless someone desires to decimate the middle class, which I don't believe is anybody's intention, this is all has to keep going. You know, right now, there's, you know, the Fed can see it. The Fed can see the money supply of the public dwindling. They have a complete pulse of the M2 supply. They see savings is just gone. Savings disappearing, long-term credit card debt growing, people holding it longer, people aren't able to pay it back. They're using those to live on. So as a result, like, you're either going to crush society or you have to take and shoot that benzo into the system, right? You have to slow it down. You have to bring wages down. You've got to take action to create an increase in unemployment for the sake of loosening up competition for available jobs. When that takes place, workers will accept less money, okay? Again, I don't make the rules. If you don't like that, and I don't either, I think it's painful for everybody, you know, I don't know that there's actually a solution. Build a rocket ship and go to a different planet, because honestly, every single country is in debt to a central bank. I wonder if that was the design, folks. By the way, if you appreciate this content, if you want more enlightening, understanding, education about what's going on in the marketplace, particularly real estate, I try to stay in my lane, please subscribe to the channel. I'd love to have you aboard. And give this video a thumbs up, because you know you liked it, okay? Hook me up, please. We'll see you on the next